Hey everybody, I've been going through some hard drives. That's Simon's bum behind me, as you could see there, and this is a lot of people getting me to hate people. Anyway, this is a doctor I interviewed in 2023, I think early 20. I can't remember actually, but it was in Tenterfield, and he was from Israel. This was before Israel-Palestine, the latest conflict, and he was from a large family. And he was an educator of GPs. So he was one of the most highly qualified GPs in Israel. And he did not like the COVID jab. And he tried to talk all of his family out of it. And he couldn't do it. Anyway, he did an interview with me. And he did another one later on with Renee, I think, a Dr. Renee from New Zealand. I'll see if I can dig that one out. But what I love about this is I get a lot of people talking to me and they say, you know, I try to talk my kids out of it or my mum out of it. I couldn't do it. Well, my thing is it's time to forgive yourself, because if this esteemed doctor and the other doctor also had over 50 years and he became a psychiatrist. So there was two doctors with 100 years experience and one had become a psychiatrist the last 10 years of his life. If they couldn't stop and their family members from taking it, they couldn't talk them out of it, what chance do the rest of us have? Okay, so enjoy this interview. I really love this man. I might reach out to him again and see if he's still there. Good night.
Great.
And
Gotcha.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Ted to Cafe Lockdown. Sorry, what's your second name, Ted?
Miller, Miller.
Ted Miller.
Miller.
And you are in Israel? Where in Israel do you live?
I'm speaking from Jerusalem, the capital.
Jerusalem. I was actually watching a film about Jerusalem the other day. What was it? It was that big mega flop. It was one about the Crusades. By the huge amount of money went into it, but it didn't work. But it was quite amazing film, still, you know. And when you're living in Jerusalem, do you feel the sense that this place is just steeped in history?
Every day. I've been living in Israel 50. Yeah, I've been living in Israel for 50 years.
50 years. Wow.
I feel it every day.
Wow. You know, what do you think it is about? I mean, apart from the history, what is it that's something that just makes it so special? Is it just that we go way back in the Bible, or is there something else?
I think so. I think it's the history more than anything. It's got a tremendously long history, and for the Jewish people, it's the beginning of everything. So that for me, it's special. You know, it's really special. In the old days, they used to refer to 4 holy towns in Israel. And don't ask me when the old days were, but we're probably talking about the Middle Ages. I'm not sure. It might have been before. It's probably before. And each one of them has nice geography. There's, you know, Jerusalem is a hilly town, and you get nice vistas. It's beautiful by itself. The other one was Safed in the north. Was considered a holy town. So was Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, and Hebron, which is in the mountains south of Jerusalem. And when you go to each of these places, you feel something special. I can't say more than that. You know, whether it comes from what we put into it or what we get from it, I can't say. like many things that we're going to talk about on this, you just have the feeling, and you
Yeah.
just go with it.
Do you
Yeah,
think that this era now, um, like they had a big thing in Australia called Camp Epic, where um, the numbers range anything from 5 to 600,000 to a couple of million. I was there the whole time. I think it was somewhere between 500,000 and a million. But I was there early because I felt I was compelled to come. And I've spoken to so many people there, and they were compelled to come. And we were coming there for freedom. We came from all over Australia. But I'm telling to people, this is historic because it's
yes,
something we went from being a material people to a spiritual people. We left everything behind. We just bought the
yes,
vehicles, we tents, we shared tents, and all we needed was each other, and it
yes.
was there. It was when people talk about it, it was there, they get goosebumps. And I say, if this isn't some evidence of a greater force of a God, then what is? You know? Because there's no way the government and big pharma, with all their marketing, could get this many people to come from all over Australia to get the booster. Ain't gonna happen. They came
Right.
there for freedom, and freedom is the gift from God. So yeah, and so that's only here in Australia, where our culture is young. In your culture and in Jerusalem, it makes sense that the spirituality would be imbued deeply into the rocks.
It's an amazing place. If I could only tell people, that you wouldn't feel it until you're here. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. But that said, though, let's get on to the meat of the thing.
sure.
Um, there's been a lot of talk of the parallels between um, Nazi Germany, COVID, especially how Israel took up the vaccine. But a friend of mine has been telling me another thing. This says not history doesn't have parallel, it rhymes. So history
Yes,
from
yes.
and
That's right.
so could we talk about that? What have you seen
Sure,
from our
sure.
discussions you've seen in Cafe Lacta or from everywhere of what are the parallels or rhymes and what's not from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think I'll start by saying that when I first heard Vera Sharav, and I've heard her on
Mm.
many occasions, I understood that you interviewed her as well. Is that correct?
Yes, recently, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't
recently,
get to
yeah.
see your interview, but I've seen her, and she's put out a series. This is a woman who lived through the
Yes, correct,
Holocaust
yeah.
and who was sensed in herself that the medical tyranny imposed by governments is similar. And
Mm.
that sort of rings with me. There's a deep theme of the Holocaust in anybody my age. I was born in 1946, which means I was conceived before the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
My father had lost his parents and two sisters. He was already in Canada, but he left behind family. And it left a deep scar on him, a deep scar. And the whole family felt it. So it was something for me that even though he was unable to talk about his family very much, and he himself didn't go through the Holocaust, the fear of some terrible evil encompassing you and chasing you was imbued in me as a kid. I picked it up.
Mm.
And the part of the medical riddle that we call the COVID and the response to COVID that rings with me is the fact that I've lost faith and security in almost everything that I knew and trusted as a result of the COVID. I'm
Yeah.
a physician. I'm a general practitioner. I'm retired now, but I was a very mainstream general practitioner. It never occurred to me not to vaccinate my children or advise my patients to be vaccinated. During the course of my practice, I did pick up a bit of, I would say, minor skepticism about the pharmacological in the pharmacy industry, big pharma. but it was never a major theme. And I continued almost to the end of my practice to propose and carry out, and I would say accept all the edicts that came down from the ivory towers of academia and were published in the journals and so on. And I accepted that. With the onset of the of COVID, I had to cancel my trip to Australia. That was the first thing.
Oh, wow.
We had planned the trip. We had tickets, and we had tickets to go to Australia. My son at the time was acting as a rabbi in Canberra. He was the modern Orthodox rabbi who was in Canberra at the time. They didn't have a rabbi, and they needed someone. And he had recently finished his training, even though in professionally he was a journalist. But he had gone on to study the rabbinate, and he was in Canberra. So we were planning to visit him, and we had to cancel. So that was sort of the first shock. But very early on, my wife, who's a medical librarian, and myself picked up signs that something was fishy. And at first it was very subtle, it was very subtle. And then it grew into total skepticism as we learned more and saw more. And it wasn't a comfortable place. And I grew up trusting authority and medical authority in particular. And it was extremely disquieting to have to say everything's wrong. And then to go through the feeling that there's no one to talk to, that the propaganda that had been carried out by the government and by the regulatory authorities, public health people, was so crushing, and the manipulation of the citizenry was so crushing that you really couldn't object. And I would have lost my license had I still been practicing. I had given up my practice some years before for other reasons and went into a related medical field. But I would have definitely not been able to continue. And it was a journey, it was a journey, and that's interesting in itself. But the outcome was that I felt oppressed and I felt helpless. And that's the parallel. I think I've often imagined myself, as an escapee, from the ghetto. Where would I have gone? Who would have I trusted? And the story is not very good. The survival rate of people out on their own in Eastern Europe, particularly, but even in places like France and Holland, there were collaborators who would turn you in. I mean, the famous story of Anne Frank, it isn't a good story. There was a collaborator who thinked on them, and turned them in. So this is the story that there's total oppression. And the other thing is that the question that troubles me more about the Holocaust than the facts of it. The facts of the Holocaust are terrible. I've read a lot about it. I know the history. The focus has been less lately in the history, as less on the facts and how the Germans managed to carry it out and who the perpetrators were, to how did entire society go nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, I've met Germans. At the beginning, growing up, even knowing a German to me was frightening, because I associated all Germans with Nazis. And the only time I ever got into a fight, it wasn't violence was not in my family. And the only time I ever got in a fight is when two immigrant kids showed up at my public school. I went to a public school in Toronto, a general public school, and two new immigrant kids that showed up in Lederhosen, in the traditional German Austrian dress of leather shorts with straps. I don't know if you see, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
At school, they were about a year younger than me, and I just went crazy. I started hitting them, and saying, your
Wow.
grandparents killed my grandparents. That's what I said
Yeah.
to them. This was, and
Yeah.
this
Well,
was all
that's what happens
very
with old
subtle.
hates.
Yeah, well, it was very subtle. I mean, I picked it up. Nobody in my family ever spoke about hating Germans or being afraid of
Yeah.
Germans, but everybody felt uncomfortable at the time, saying if my mother or father hired someone who might be German, and they were very anxious about it. And they really wouldn't, we wouldn't have a
Mm.
German worker in the house and so forth. And what I'm saying is that during the course of my adult life, I've met many Germans. In fact, I became the doctor for a group of young Germans who had come to Jerusalem to work and volunteer work, in a sense of doing penance for their parents and grandparents,
Wow.
and they were a wonderful group of young people. So
Yeah.
that phobia has been entirely erased, but the idea that entire people could go nuts and set up and allow a maniac to be a leader, a killer maniac to be a people and follow his edicts is the same feeling I have about the current state of affairs. It's a mystery to me how it could be that so many good doctors and so many good people could allow the government to carry out a medical policy that is dangerous, harmful, and that suppresses any uh, opposite views and any resistance. So that's in that sense the fear that this can happen, the very fear that it can happen in a democracy, taught me a big lesson and has unsettled me. I would say that I differ with many people in the camp that I find myself in, that I can't put my finger on the perpetrators. I see it as a much more complex and terrible event that has multiple causes. And I'm curious about teasing out the various causes. I happen to have seen on television Bill Gates on the day that the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. There was some delay in their declaring a pandemic. But when they finally did, Bill Gates got on television and said, we're not going to see ourselves out of this until everybody in the world is vaccinated. I don't know if you heard that. He said
Of
that, and
which
I saw
I,
it, and I knew,
yeah.
and I knew right. I'm sorry, I'm getting the sun is coming. This is just we face east, and this is sunrise in Jerusalem, so I'm getting to the shadows. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
the that to me was the trigger that something is wrong.
That's
And
interesting.
when everybody picked up that mantra, and the public health authorities acted like that was true, it sort of pointed the finger at him. But I have no illusion that that man is so powerful to be able to do this. He and his organizations happen to have control of important world bodies like the World Health Organization, and he set up a number of I would say associated bodies like Vaccine Gavi, which is the World Vaccine Advisory Panel or something. Now he sets that up and it advises the WHO, which follows his advice. He follows his own advice. And then all the other health departments in the world are expected to. But
It shouldn't be
don't get me
funny. I don't know
wrong.
why it's funny, but it makes me
Well,
laugh. You know what I mean?
it's the question is, how could Hitler have carried out the Holocaust by himself?
No, impossible. Yeah.
Impossible.
No, they had
Correct?
people behind
Right.
him who
He had people
I
behind it.
yeah. Just go to Bill Gates. I just want to back up on a few things you said. One,
Yeah.
Anne Frank. Now,
Yeah.
I've always been interested in the Holocaust, and
Yes.
simply for that reason. How could it possibly happen? You watch the
Right.
film Cabaret. Berlin then looks pretty cool,
Yeah.
except for these Nazis,
Yeah.
and then they get to
Right.
here. I interviewed a young German. He was about coming up to his 40s, and he said when he was in Germany, he had to learn about the Holocaust in school constantly. He had no choice. It was like shame,
Right.
shame, shame.
Yeah.
But even though he did all these lessons, he never could understand how the Germans went with it until he was living in Victoria under Daniel Andrews. And he said
I
that was the
see.
lesson. Now I can see how it happened. And it takes a few prominent, influential characters pushing it, and the rest of the majority are silent. And they're
That's
just
right.
sort of trying to
Exactly.
avoid conflict, and they go with the strength. And they switch off their empathy, even their morality, their critical thinking, and they just head that way. And a few people stand back and go, hang on. And even when I was at Epic and all these people were there, I said to them, I said, it's like a gathering of freedom guardians. Is something in our DNA, maybe in humans,
That's
like
right.
in different humans, there's this strand of DNA that goes, if you're called upon, you're in the Freedom Army, get up. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just because
I think there'll be a lot of interesting history written, and
mm,
I hope that the enormity of the evil, and I use the word very reluctantly, but it is evil.
mm,
The enormity of the evil of the public health fraud will be admitted and discovered. I mean, it's
mm.
always possible. I mean, I asked, well, if I were to ask you how many perpetrators in the Holocaust were actually punished by Nuremberg, would you know the number?
I think there was
How
about
many people were
300. There's about
hung?
300 and something hung, at least by an English. I know there was an English uh, hangman who became famous because of that. He did about 300, 360, but I think the Americans did a lot more. So I'm
I
not
think there were
sure.
much less. My impression is that there were much
Okay.
less. Now, I'm not a historian, but I might be
No.
talking about a certain phase, like the first trials, but there were only about 11, all
Mm.
right, that I know of, and a couple of escaped. One escaped, of course, because he took cyanide, but
Well, look at
this
the
was a
funding that
crime.
Hitler had, but look at the funding Hitler
Yeah,
had to go from a broke Germany to
yeah,
build this great army, um,
right,
basically clothe, put uniforms on all his soldiers.
right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
and what he seemed to do was sell hope and to people that were desperate for
Yeah,
hope. And I sort of see the parallels here. They create an enemy, COVID. Here we've got the hope. You know what I
right.
mean? And using love
Yes,
against us. I think they actually
yes,
said it's like an alien film. All humans against the alien, and we've all got to do this for each other.
right.
And people get it. They go, "Oh yeah, I get it. Okay, we're going to fight it." But the thing that woke me up, or not woke me up, the thing that finally made me go, "Okay, something seriously fishy here," was there was a French virologist, Luc, I can't know his second name,
Montagnier,
who,
Montagnier.
yeah, and
Yeah.
he'd isolated the AIDS virus. And I saw him come up and he said, I'm 82 years old. I've got a Nobel Prize. I've got money. I'm not worried about losing my job. And I'm peer reviewing this study by this Indian students. And I'm telling you, I concur this virus has been tinkered with. And then he got cancelled. And I was here and people
Yes.
working in
Yeah.
supermarkets were going to me. I had a friend in a supermarket and he said, oh yeah, he should, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. I said, no, 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 no.
Right.
He won a Nobel Prize for virology. He knows what he's talking about. You don't know what you're talking about because you're stacking
Yeah.
tuna. No offense to you, but when it comes to this, I'm going to err with this guy. And they cancelled him. And then they were cancelling doctors. And I just thought, in from a practical sense, in a pandemic, you don't cancel your prize fighters. It just
No,
doesn't make
that's absolutely
any
correct.
sense.
The person who I resonated with, and it was early on also, was Zev Zelenko. I don't know
Yeah.
Zev Vladimir Zelenko. He was a general practitioner like myself, and that already impressed me because general practitioners have a certain ethos, a certain kind of way of thinking, and a certain rationale, and a certain sense of commitment to their patients. So
Mm,
he was working in a community where he applied also from the French, picked up some tips about what might help very early on in the pandemic. and his story is well known. He used hydroxychloroquine and some other antibiotics and some things, and he claims to have had zero patients hospitalized, or zero patients die and a few patients hospitalized, because he instituted early treatment, and he was the pioneer of early treatment for COVID. To this day, the health authorities in America do not recognize any early treatment. Because he felt an obligation to share what he knew, he called up President Trump at the time, got his press secretary or somebody to listen to him, and Trump went public with his suggestions very early, and they were both canceled. And people laughed at Trump, and a mockery was made of Zelenko's work. Now, what followed was what really convinced me, because what followed was fake science. I mean, he was called quackery in a sense, and there were in a very short period after hydroxychloroquine was mentioned as a possible drug, the two most prestigious journals in the world, the Lancet and the New England Journal, happened to publish studies that showed that it didn't work. Hydroxychloroquine didn't work. Within a month, both of these journals had to retract their articles, as they had been totally faked. There was no basis for the claim. This research hadn't been done, and had been fabricated. Now, if that doesn't tell you something, really, it's maddening.
I know.
Furthermore, there was research done using hydroxychloroquine that wasn't fake. It was just corrupt. Zelenko had suggested that if you use hydroxychloroquine in the dosage that it's used for other diseases, and it was used widely for certain heart conditions, certain inflammatory conditions, if you used it in that dose early on in the illness, before the 5th day of the illness, you prevented the cytokine storm, which was the worst part of the illness, which usually got people hospitalized and killed. He said you could prevent it. So the studies that showed that hydroxychloroquine didn't work used exactly the opposite conditions. It used hospitalized patients who had already passed the early period of the disease. They weren't mild, they were serious, many of them were dying, and they used doses which were far above 4 times the dosage that Zelenko used. So when those researchers concluded that hydroxychloroquine is no good, it's no surprise that it was fake. It was really corrupted research. So you had corrupted research and fake research brought in by the top medical authorities in the world to prove that something that a GP had discovered or applied, he didn't discover it, he applied it, was wrong. Now, the same thing happened to vitamin D and to the story of ivermectin. Now, the vitamin D
which was banned in Australia, banned before COVID.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing, because the medicine, as you know, won a Nobel Prize. It wiped out diseases, parasitic diseases in Africa, I believe, and won a prize. You know, the inventor of it won a Nobel Prize, and rightly so. It was, and the safety record is untouchable. Now, it's interesting that my kids. Really, I've got 2 adult children, sons, who really went along with the mainstream. This is true of very many families. We see, the issue of COVID splitting the family in half. And my kids, who were very kind and, generally understanding, have independent minds, and they decided that the mainstream doctors must be telling the truth because they're the top people in the world, and daddy's just a GP who's been retired for 10 years. So what does he know? He's been captured by the nuts. So my son in Jerusalem begged me to speak to people who he knew. He happened to be connected with friendship with one of the top researchers whose paper was used worldwide to prove that the drug was safe in teenagers. And he also had someone in his congregation who worked for the Ministry of Health, doing work. And he begged me to speak to these people, who would then convince me and my wife to take the the shot. And being respectful of my children, as I expect them to be respectful of me, I did what he said. I met these two people, and I was flabbergasted. I really expected that the one person who was a epidemiologist in the Department of Health admitted to me early on when I asked her that the department had not set up any mechanism to measure the damages from the vaccine. This is in a country where the prime minister got up and said, "We're going to be the laboratory for the world. We're going to be the pioneers. We're going to be the first country to." Yeah.
So my inverters.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're going to be the. It was Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time who boasted that we're going to be the first country to be all entirely vaccinated. But the Department of Health was not ordered and never set up any system for collecting or for monitoring injuries. It took about 6 months before they did something, and then it got overwhelmed. It was a voluntary setup, and they had to turn off the phones, basically. So it was a terrible record. So when she told me that at this point that they had nothing in place, I was really astounded that this was really a fake scientific effort. It was a marketing effort, but not a scientific effort. And then I spoke with the epidemiologist who was like world class, from an Ivy League school, working with big data from Israel's central data, which is very well collected. We have a central data collection service which allows for monitoring, people's health and the community's health. And he had written some articles. He had written articles which I had some doubts about. And when I asked about it, I got answers that were entirely unacceptable. It was bad science. It just was bad science. And I'm not a big scientist. I hadn't done a lot of research. I understood research methods, and I saw flaws. And when I asked him, it was basically mumbling answers. Really couldn't satisfy me anyway. So I walked away from these two meetings strengthened in my belief that something was afoul. And that continues. I mean, it's astounding how people continue to accept the narrative. I actually bought ivermectin on the black market. It is my first, word of mouth. I found that somebody had imported a huge load. Yeah, you did.
I had a friend, Richard. He does sometimes does shows with me, a big guy, and he had it, and he delivered it to my house, and I wasn't allowed out, so I went out and said it's not there, and he delivered it to the wrong house. So not only did he have to come back to the house and get the ivermectin out of the letterbox during a lockdown, but then he had to take it to the right house. And this is for ivermectin, which I could have taken the whole bottle; it wouldn't have hurt me. That's
correct. That's correct.
Can I tell just about scientists, just to show you parallels here? We had a thing, apart from all the battles of people have seen of the shooting of the shrine and all this. Another thing that Melbourneians did was Daniel Andrews brought in a bill which was going to give him despot powers. I mean, basically, he has the law now. If I'm back in Victoria, which I will be soon, if he thinks I'm a danger, he can throw me in one of these camps for up to 2 years, no trial, no lawyer, no habeas corpus, gone. And I'm there. I can write to a journal. I can write to the warden once a week to say, look, can I be let out for these reasons?
Yeah.
And then that goes to the Cho guy. And then if they let me out and they find I'm innocent, I've still got to pay for my entire incarceration. So we fought this. It was called the Kill the Bill protest. We fought it more than it was an incredible fight. The people were so against it, And one thing we did, we occupied the steps of Parliament for a month. And I wrote a thing called the Steps of Solace, because people were baffled, people like yourself. Were coming up to the steps. Their family and friends couldn't talk to them, and they just talked to us. And so suddenly these, we called ourselves COVID Jews, because they were making us out, to the parallels, they were making us out like the Jews of a Nazi regime. So we called ourselves COVID Jews, And that was before Zelenko said we're all Jews. So, you know, I totally,
Right.
absolutely
Right.
related to that when he said that. And people walking past, hurling such vicious hate at us. It was unprecedented. Anyway, but amongst that, there was one young girl, and she was a bit nerdy looking. And I talked to her, and she said, "I'm a chemistry student. I'm just about to finish my university degree, and I want to do the PhD, but they won't let me finish unless I take the jab." And I've said to them,
Right.
I've got questions, and her parents and the university said, sometimes you don't ask questions, you just do what you're told. She's a
Yeah.
scientist.
Yeah.
Her job is to
Absolutely.
ask questions. Her whole
Yeah.
life is going to be one question after another. And now she's told not to ask. So that was strange. But then we had other people coming up who claimed to be top scientists who secretly came up. And because I was
Yeah.
getting known, they'd find me out and they'd go, the mask doesn't
Yes.
work. It's like having
Yeah.
chicken
That's
wire
right.
on your face to stop mosquitoes. Doesn't work.
Yeah.
So early on, we were realizing we call it BS here. We were under a
Yeah. Sure.
thick layer
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
suffocating BS. And
That's absolutely
everyone was
correct.
just go.
That's
They even
absolutely
had a church here in a country town. I can't believe I still saw it. And it said, Jesus wants you to get the jab.
right.
And you're
Right.
going, seriously?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
After
Yeah. Yeah.
2,000 years, he finally sends a message and all he says is get vaccinated? Really? That's what he says?
You know, the association of the downtrodden and the subjects of prejudice with Jews is interesting. My wife and I attended a lecture yesterday. It was on the Book of Esther. The Hebrew Bible has a Book of Esther. I don't know if all the Christian denominations have it. So I think the Eastern traditions have not accepted that book as a worthy book to be in the Bible. But it's a story basically of how Queen Esther saves the Jews from the Persian tyrant who is close to the king and wants to wipe out the Jews. And it has a happy ending. It's written like a farce. It's a very interesting
Okay.
story, and the author of this study uh, said he's not going to add anything historical to the story, but he had researched how different periods of time and different communities had viewed the book, and he made the point that during the Middle Ages, when the Catholics and the Protestants were hitting on each other, each group that felt that they were being persecuted identified with the Book of Esther and the Jews in the Book of Esther. So the association of Jews with victimhood certainly goes back a long way. That was
Yeah.
just a curiosity. There's no question that we are all victims.
Mm.
But the emphasis, there's no question. I'm not a born Israeli. I emigrated here, as I said, 50 years ago, after I'd grown up and received my medical training in Canada. People often think of us as
Oh my
Americans,
God,
but I'm really a Canadian,
that's all.
and I have family in Canada, so I'm following the Canadian scene, which is almost as bad as Australia. The tyranny there.
We think Canada's bad.
Yeah,
Canada seems to
yeah.
us to be
I'm
like
saying
an
that.
open wound in the world now.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a tyranny that is
Mm.
unbelievable, and
Mm.
that the medical associations there enforce the government line against
Mm.
all research. I mean, to
Mm.
me, that is the most painful of all aberrations. That the medical associations would uh, they're the ones who, or the licensing bodies, would take away uh, the licensure of any doctor who opposed the government line, even if it was evidence based and supported by research, peer reviewed research. Uh,
Mm.
that to me, we know of stories in Canada where doctors lost their licenses. You know, it's
Yeah, I've met loads of
absolutely
doctors.
so. Um, as I said, I probably would have lost my license here. I had started a
You
practice in
definitely would have
Jerusalem.
lost your license here.
Yeah, I started a group practice in Jerusalem. It was very successful because it was along the lines of Canadian medicine 50 years ago, and it offered a very good service, and it grew very quickly. And I took in other Anglo, meaning English-speaking physicians who were trained in the English or American model of medicine, which in family practice was not widespread in Israel at the time, and people liked it. Uh, I left the practice some years ago, but continued to play basketball with one of my old partners. And the mildest protest that I did was to write a letter to the Jerusalem Post, which is the English language newspaper in Jerusalem, suggesting that they do a little more research in their writing on medicine. That they were putting in articles on archaeology, which made the paper very interesting. And it's I think it's one of the few major newspapers that almost daily reports on archaeology, because in Israel it's a big deal. You
Yeah,
find a
yeah, it
coin
is.
from
Yeah.
the you find a coin from the time of King David, or you
Yeah,
find
yeah, fell out of Jesus's pocket
a
on it.
church. That's right. Or you find a church, that was built in the year 300 or something. It's
Yeah,
all very
yeah.
exciting. And I suggested that they do some digging as well in medicine, because then they would find about vitamin D and they'd find out about ivermectin. And I didn't say people shouldn't get vaccinated, and I didn't claim that vaccines. I made no statement about vaccines. I simply suggested that they widen their scope of coverage of the medical world. And this partner of mine approached me at one of the basketball games and said, you shouldn't have said that. I said, what do you mean? I didn't. What I said was perfectly logical. People should get educated about other alternatives. And he
Mm.
said, well, you're a man of standing. You're well known in the community, and people are going to interpret what you said as a criticism. I said, well, people are rational. They can choose. I said, by the way, if you don't have the literature that I'm referring to, I'll be happy to share it with you. And he said, oh no. He says, I couldn't do that. I have to I trust the people above me, as I've always done. And that to me was shocking. So that gives you a clue as to how the Nazis came to power.
Yeah.
The kind of
Well, with that kill
obedience
the
of,
bill.
of
Yeah, sorry.
authority and the sanctions, mild or less mild, that were put on protest. I mean, the Nazis, once they got into power in 1933, didn't tolerate any opposition. But that kind of uniformity and willingness to accede to authority without thinking is not scientific, is not medicine, and is really reflects a political tyranny that has no place
Mm.
in medicine. And that was shocking.
It goes
Absolutely
past
shocking.
medicine. Like one of the plays I had on, we had a guy in there who loved acting, but he was one of us, Victoria at least, best barristers, family court
Ah,
barrister.
yes,
And
yes.
he was a wonderful guy. He was big. He was a character, typical barrister, He just had charm, and you could see that the jury would give whoever he was on, the jury would go with him just because
Yes.
you kind of liked the guy. And he and I used to have conversations about everything, because he liked my work, and we talk about different plays. But then when this happened, he just did it. He got the vaccines. He kept getting COVID. Every time he got the vaccine, he'd get COVID. And he'd even tell us, well, it's not working very well, is it? But he'd still go get the next one. Then when I brought up, we had our last play on somewhere, and I just come as an observer. And because they didn't want people to know I was around in case they didn't turn up to the theater. And I said to him about this bill with Dan Andrews. And he just won that year. He just won Barrister of the Year in Victoria, I think, or maybe even nationally. And I said to him about this bill, and he said, "Oh, is that what he's trying to get passed?" I said, "Passed. He's passed it. It's law now. You You're the top barrister. You're the barrister of the year. How can you not know that? Like, I've been in the trenches with cleaners from McDonald's fighting for our freedom.
That's
and you're the top barrister. And you don't even know this law is passed. He got rid of habeas corpus. This is like incredibly. And then around Australia, they've done the same. WA has a law now. Say you were living in WA and you went against the government. The government can come to your house without a warrant, come into your house without a warrant, take you away, your wife away, your kids away, they're there, all your computers, take you to a camp of their thing and inoculate you against your will. That's law in WA now, Western Australia.
Is it?
Now, to me, that is a law that even North Korea would go, oh, that's a bit far,
that's
don't
right.
you think?
Yeah,
maybe a little far. You know, even Hitler might have gone, oh, that's, you know, you can only put, but honestly, I can't believe it. South Australia's got one.
I know.
Queensland's passed a medical one, which is basically the doctors have to do what the government says. So in Australia now, you've got patient, government, doctor between you.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And now in Australia, the people that I deal with don't try. We had a man the other day we met. I was on a farm and there was a man that wanted to work on my bus. So he's working on this bus and he's a gorgeous man, Bill. And then he said one of his friends is sick in the caravan. He's terrified of going to the hospital because he doesn't want them to vaccinate him. Can you go check? So I went and checked on him and he'd had a stroke. He'd been in this hot, stinky caravan for 2 days. And I came in, he says, I can't lift my arm. And I'm going, oh my God. And you're just thinking, this is where we are. These people get this sick and they're trying to tough it out because they're terrified of hospitals. How did
the stroke was probably cut. You know, when there's an increase in an illness, it's hard to know. If you have a 10% or 20% increase in an illness like stroke, it's hard to tease out which of the 10% got it from the vaccine. But it's clear
this guy's unvaccinated.
The vaccine,
his fear of hospitals.
And one of the ways of knowing that, one of the ways of being able to tease out whether the excess deaths that are now occurring everywhere in the world, or the excess mortality, meaning illnesses, are related to COVID, is to simply do a study of how soon after vaccination these events occurred. That's on one hand. And secondly, some of them have long-term effects, comparing the non-vaccinated to the vaccinated. And we know that there's excess deaths, but nobody is prepared. None of the health authorities in the world are prepared to plot that out on a graph showing vaccination status. I don't know if you follow John Campbell. John, does that name mean anything?
Yeah, of course. Campbell?
Yeah. Well, I watch him.
He's been an extraordinary journey.
Yeah, he's really he is providing the data that should be running policy. You know, and he's decrying the and for your readers, you know, he's an epidemiologically minded educator who started in nursing and nursing education, but then went into epidemiology and public health, and simply has a podcast that reviews the emerging data from government and official sources, and it's astounding, absolutely astounding, that nobody will do this. He pointed out that until 8 months ago, this was being reported, and the vaccine status as related to deaths, and then and it was being reported every 2 months, and then all of a sudden it stopped. And you can get no reason. Now it's clear. I mean, it's certainly suspicious that the answer is going to be that the vaccinated are less healthy, and they're carrying the burden of the excess mortality and excess deaths. I mean, my wife and I have friends, a couple who are well educated. He's a scientist who had an office in Jerusalem's prestigious hospital. He had a laboratory associated with the medical school in the prestigious medical center, Hadassah. and he did not want to get vaccinated, but they wouldn't let him in the building unless he was vaccinated, and he's just had a stroke. Now, I'm not sure whether he's put two and two together, you know. But I'll give you a more personal question. A situation in my own family. I have a brother who is an engineer. He's a doctor of engineering. He's well educated and should be able to figure out cause and effect. That seems a pretty clear engineering. He was vaccinated and had shingles after the vaccination, which is a common side effect of shingles. He continued to follow his doctor's advice and got a second vaccine. And then he got the booster and then had shingles again. And then he went on to get COVID. So that the capture of the mind, you know, is so complete. And the educated, as you point out, are more susceptible to this. And this is, I think, all the studies would show that people with university education are more susceptible to brainwashing and to accepting the authority of other academicians than the man on the street. Everyone we speak to who's a tradesman or a worker understands that it's a fraud.
Yeah.
But our educated friends think that we're the outliers.
Yeah. It's interesting, you know, I interviewed a psychiatrist who was also a GP. So he's 50 years. I think he was a GP for about 30 years. And then in his 50s, he wanted to become a psychiatrist. And we interviewed him in his 70s.
Wow.
He's very much like you, very calm, very, you know, and just critically thinks and has an empathy to him. And his entire family disregarded him. He was begging all his kids, his wife, friends, everyone. I have another man who's a professor who's been studying atolls in the Pacific. And saying that they're rising out of the ocean. There's no rising water, there's no rising ocean levels. He said the land masses are getting greater. He said that's the truth, I've seen it. And he also was begging his family. They ignore him. When he does an interview with us, he has to go to the back garden, and because his wife won't let him do an interview in the house. Now, so what my thinking is, if my father was a bus driver, so if a doctor said do something and Dad said not, I'd say, Dad, you're a bus driver. But if I say, Dad, you're a psychiatrist and a GP, I think, no, that actually has resonance. You must listen to these people. You must at least have a conversation and hear them out. So if they're disregarding the advice from men or like yourselves, then I wonder if there's another need pushing them to get the vaccine. And what I've noticed, this came from a friend of mine who's on my side. She's Australian. She does streaming, and her psychologist said to her, "Have you been vaccinated?" She said, "No." She goes, "Well, you've got to get vaccinated." She said, "Why?" "You don't want to be a second-class citizen."
Right.
And I think that is the genius of this, and why they've used the word anti-vaxxers and fascists and Nazis.
Right.
I mean, over here, Rukshan is one of our greatest, is one of our gifts of the resistance. This Indian man who filmed the shooting, they call him a Nazi.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
And he goes, he just. It's extraordinary, but they use the words because they know they're weaponizing them. So people don't want to be hated. So they're basically getting the vaccine just to be left alone. And I wonder if that's what's happening with people.
To an extent, it is. It's part of the mind control and the population control is to isolate you and to paint you in a certain color. Ironically, my problem in protesting and in speaking out is exactly the I would say the flip side of that. I find myself in the company of people whose ideas I often found wacko, crazy in the past. It happens that we converge on this issue. not necessarily from the same point of view. In other words, there are people who have been distrustful of authority forever, and on every issue. Now, and if I had a patient walk into my office and expound some fringe medical theory, I was taught this, but I accepted it and embraced it. I was always respectful. What a person believes is very important, and ultimately, it's his right to believe what he wants. So I never tried to disabuse people of their strongly held beliefs. I would offer them whatever information they needed. I would never not treat somebody because they believed that their disease was coming from some element that medicine had not yet approved as the causative agent. But now at rallies, when I go to rallies, I find myself in a group of people who are fringe and have always been fringe. And that's not me. I'm a logical, rational person, but I'm prepared to give up on the privilege of being mainstream in order to be true. And even if it means sitting in a rally with people who I don't agree with entirely, there is a red line, and you have to say on which side of the red line you are, no matter what that means.
I get that a lot over here. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
So people think of me, perhaps I'm an anti vaxxer, and the irony is, it's a real irony, that having seen what's gone on in COVID, the degree to which Big Pharma has clearly manipulated the agenda, without a doubt, in which case the government has colluded with Big Pharma, I began to question all of the things that I believed before as a doctor. And if I was never an anti-vaxxer in the past, I'm certainly prepared. I want to look at the data. And there was a panel similar to this discussion where some of the top people, I think it was Del Bigtree, who was a big spokesman in the States against the COVID vaccination, against vaccinations generally. He had some of the experts up who had spoken out against COVID, and one of them still believed in vaccines generally. But of the 5 experts that he had, 4 of them had said they had lost faith in the science that supported even the original vaccine. And that was interesting because it's a spreading disbelief, and that really leaves me shaken, because if what used to be called quackery medicine now has to be considered, then quackery history also has to be. So
I see this happening.
The word conspiracy theories is bandied about, and I'm very reluctant to consider myself a conspiracy theorist, and the distinction I make between myself and some of my cohorts who I find myself at rallies with is I'm not prepared to posit a cabal, a specific group of people as organizing and manufacturing this evil. I think it has to be worked out. It has to be understood. It has to be understood on multiple levels, and there are multiple themes contributing to it. It's too easy to say that there's a small group of people, even the drug industry. In fact, I find it easier to think the drug industry is at fault than some political agenda behind it, and the eugenics agenda that is being proposed as a cause makes me very uncomfortable. I think you need more.
The eugenics in Canada, the maids.
Yeah.
I mean, I was filling up with fuel today at this garage, and it was a dodgy garage. I got up to 64 liters, and I'm thinking, well, that's good because I've only got a 60-liter tank. So how am I got 64 liters? I'm in this country town, and I thought, oh hell, they got a few bucks out of me. Who cares? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not going to cause trouble. I'm already lost. But on the Bowser, it said 16 plus to work the Bowser. And in Australia, what they were coming out to 12-year-olds was saying if the 12-year-old is seen by the vaccinator as a mature age minor, they can
Yeah.
decide to get vaccinated without the
Against
parents
their
even
parents.
knowing.
Yeah.
And to me, that I found that horrendous. People forget that. Now,
Yeah.
with the maids in Canada, they're proposing that a 12-year-old can go to a doctor or a psychologist, and if
Yeah.
they're depressed, they can be offered euthanasia and
Right.
decide for
Right.
themselves
Right.
in the
Yeah,
mature
I
age
know.
minor.
I know.
This is evil.
Unbelievable.
It's
Unbelievable.
evil. We're in
It
evil
is.
times
It's
now.
that's true. And I use the word very guardedly. I
Yeah,
started my
I agree with
career.
you. It's because it's like a word from a fairy tale book or something. You don't want to. This is not because I thought, to my belief growing up, because I was not really interested in politics.
Mhm.
I always felt that the politics were corrupt, but they were corrupt in a way like, hey, get a few bucks, I'll get your thing through, looking after each other,
Yeah.
we've been each other's back. But if push came to shove, they had Australia's back. They were
Yes.
Australian, right? You get down to their heart and
Right.
souls, they were Aussies and
Right.
they'd have your back.
Yes, sir. Right.
That is, I think, the great tragedy now is you're realizing these people don't. Whether they're doing it because they've got a vision or misguided or whatever, I see them doing things that are beyond unacceptable, that
Yes.
are evil, coming in. And there was a
Absolutely.
school down the road from here. They vaccinated all the boys. One boy escaped. He was in a toilet calling his mum with a mobile phone that she told me she wasn't going to give him. Now she praises God that she gave him a phone, and she raced down and picked him up. But he's hiding in a toilet. And he said they were just
Yeah.
rounding them up.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is, I've
Yeah.
talked to people, they come in, they just round them up, push them in, take it. And then these people have been healthy and now constantly sick and can't even do the
Yes.
job.
That's right.
And and this is to save
It,
grandmothers. The thing here was like over here, they were saying to the kids, be a hero, save your grandmother. Don't murder your grandmother. This was the things they were doing in school.
that's right.
And so
That's
the
right.
kids were doing
And,
it to each other. You want to kill
and
your
yes, right.
grandparents? You want to kill my grandparents?
Yeah, exactly. And my family was telling me I was being socially um, disrespectful. I was,
There you
my
go.
my closest family were telling me, who knew a little bit more about medicine than they did, that it was irresponsible of me not to get vaccinated in order to save other people.
Mm,
And it's a terrible thought to think of how many people have suffered. There's definitely a
mm,
suppression of the knowledge. And, uh, there's no question that evil is happening. In other words, that people are being damaged on a large scale, that truth is being suppressed, that anybody who can offer hope is being shut down. So that's
mm.
evil. The question
The
is,
CEO of
who are the
Veritas is just being sacked.
really,
Yeah, that's
really? I
just
didn't know
today.
that.
That's
Yeah.
today's
The-
news. Yeah, he's done an announcement.
the-
They've kicked him. They've kicked him out. I
so,
mean,
so
this
the,
was the
my
man who's
yeah,
just got the scoop of the century. You know.
yeah. So my question
Yeah.
would be, and it's a difficult one. It's almost an intellectual exercise. If the evil's being done, it's being done by good people. In other words,
Yes,
if you the nurses who are injecting, and the people who
they
and the
believe it.
doctors who are injecting, they believe it, and in every other way, they're good people. So how does such where it's easy to say that evil's being done. It's harder to say who the evil people are. But
Mm.
but I and I'm working on it. And to me, the evil people are the people in authority who know better.
Do you
And
think? I'll just let you finish. But do you
go
think?
ahead. No,
Right,
no.
we look at the people like Klaus Schwab and
Yeah.
and his little. It's like Frankenstein, the little guy that looks like he should be eating bugs. What's his name? He's from
Harari.
Israel.
Yuval
Harari.
Harari.
Yeah, my friend David Russell says that's a demon. If there's ever a demon on the world, that's a demon. But I
Yeah.
actually wonder, do they have a vision? They have a vision for the world and they are determined to see it through. And that vision, the end justifies the means. So they don't
Yeah,
see themselves as evil. They see themselves as like being cruel to be kind. Yes, it's going to be hard now. Yes, some people are going to die, but we're going to get to a much better world where you're not going to own anything and you're going to be, they're telling us what. So I actually think that's more dangerous. And there's some people in the power, like maybe Dan Andrews, they're in on it, going, yep, I'm on board, Dan and stuff like this. I just wonder if that's more the case. And I often think that our side doesn't have vision yet because we're just reacting. But I also think with evil,
that's true. That's
another
very
reason we
true,
can
by the way.
use the word evil is I have never seen such a rise in spirituality. Everywhere I go now, people go to me and like I grew up in Australia. You did not say the only person who said God bless was your mum or your grandmother.
Yeah,
If you came out of my house and I said God bless, you'd be going like,
yeah,
is he one of those? You know,
yeah,
it
yeah,
was
yeah,
socially
yeah,
unacceptable to be outwardly religious. You didn't even mention. Now they carry crosses in the rallies. They say the
yeah,
Lord's Prayer at rallies.
yeah.
They say God bless to each other. We have people on here. I come on, and if they're religious and they want to do a prayer, I say do a prayer.
Yes,
Total change. And so I see the rise of spirituality. I wonder if it's rising so fast because evil's rising, and this is the yin yang sort of thing. It's and people like us or the social media people who are speaking out are actually freedom sort of natural immunity. We're the white blood
yes,
cells coming to the
right.
aid saying, look, freedom's under attack. We're all you got. And
Eh,
I do wonder that because I do feel that humanity itself is under threat from this stuff changing our DNA, which I think is God's code. A man said to me last night, an old man said this beautiful thing. He says, it's so wonderful to be a human. Why would you screw with it?
Yeah,
And I thought,
exactly.
that's a t-shirt, man. That's the
But
t-shirt. And, you know,
yeah, but that statement, if I
that's
can
it.
take that statement, what I've decided I'm trying to do is to find the common denominator,
Mm,
the lowest common denominator. I do this all. I'm quite aware of the threat to humanity. I
mm,
think that the idea of transhuman insertion of artificial intelligence and so forth into human beings and the kind of genetic manipulation they want to do is madness. It's hubris
yeah.
and it's mad. I find, however, that phrasing that in religious terms is fine for me and fine for the people who identify religiously around me. But it's not the universal answer because religion has lost a lot of its luster in the last 100 years. But the person who said, being a human is such a great thing, didn't make a religious statement. He made a humanist statement. And it's a
That's
humanist
right.
statement that we can all identify with. So what I
That's
try
right.
to do is to limit my statements to value judgments that are based on data and that are inclusive and not exclusive. Now, I think every believing Christian has obviously the right and probably the responsibility to carry his faith with him, into this fight. But at the same time, that can be divisive.
Mm,
I'm not a Christian, and my history is such that I don't view Christianity in the same positive light as those who think the Crusades were great. You
huh?
know,
Well,
they
I've
for
read about
us
the Crusades. We were
for us the
bastards.
Crusade, yeah, and for the Jewish community the Crusades were terrible. So
Yeah.
that so that to me, I'm not trying to suppress anybody's right, and I'm open to everybody's position. But if we're going to join together and fight together, I think we should try as much as we can to find a common language that
Mm,
doesn't that we can all identify with wholly without having to be too selective.
Yeah, well, that's over here. The churches have lost. They're gone. They were closed all through the. Charles, just grab that.
Yeah.
They were closed all through the shutdowns, and then they opened up and they segregated. And people said simply, I used to say, but people got it. Jesus didn't go with just the vaccinated lepers; he went with the lepers. And
Yes,
so
yes,
that
yes.
they were sacrilegious. And I told some priests off.
Right.
I
That's
said,
really
why
good.
don't you
I
come
like
on the
that.
show and talk? But why don't you
Yeah.
come on the show and talk? And their friend, they wouldn't speak to me. Their friend said, oh, they can't do that. They'd lose their collar. I said, everybody here has lost their jobs, has lost family, has lost friends. And your religion is based on a man who who was crucified defending the truth. And you're worried about your collar? I said, these people are lost. They need spiritual guidance. You're it. And you're silent.
Absolutely.
And they just smiled at me and left. Couldn't believe it.
It's a bankruptcy of
that's right.
Of religion.
So I'm more a believer in, because I do a show now, Balaclava Rising, with Leon, who's an Orthodox Jew.
I've seen that.
And I was approached there was a young man in the march, and every time there's a young person, I always try to get them to do an interview if they're strong enough. And he held off and finally said, I want to do an interview. And it turned out he was a young Orthodox Jew. It was a beautiful interview. And through that, I met Leon and Shoshona. And then I said, well, let's do it. Let's forget, because we're all Jews now. So let's forget this and Christianity, this and this. God is just, to me, that I'm not sure what God is, whether we invented him or not, but what I think it is evil can be the worst of us. And sometimes that's necessary to be a bastard in certain situations, but God can be the best of us. And I think it's something to us to aspire to be. I even said to someone, I hear all this stuff about the Holy Grail. What if the Holy Grail is simply a challenge from God to be the best version of yourself? And that's it. That's your challenge. Go down to this planet. We're going to give you all these faults. I'm going to give you all these obstacles. And I'm going to give you, the only thing in your side is each other and your sense of humor and your soul. There's a compass in it that points to me. Good luck. And
that's wonderful.
And I think that I'm the best version of me now, simply because, I don't know, I can just feel it. I'm comfortable with myself now. If I was to crash the bus now, go, yeah, okay, I went out on my feet. I'm not getting on my knees. I'm on my feet now. I'm paying a lot for it, but I don't care, because I like the view from my feet. And I like the people I meet. And I think what's happening is beyond wrong. It's evil now. And the evil is becoming normalized. Like in Canada, Trudeau makes it normal. It's not normal. It's utterly unacceptable. And it's not a foundation to build a society on that we can leave to our children and our grandchildren. It has to be fought. It has to be rallied against. And we have to bring back, if nothing else, kindness, decency, and love for each other. And so, another guy said to me, it was the same guy actually. He's just this old guy. He was an old teacher that can't teach anymore. What did he say? We need a society where we pray for each other and not prey on each other. And I was like going, man, there's a little prophet in this country town. So that's what I'm meaning. People are rising to it, but at the moment we're still in the minority, because people have a lot of stuff. It's like Jesus on Mount Sinai. The devil's going, well, you can have your holiday home, you can have your Mercedes-Benz, you can have your Rolex watch, or you can have this freedom sign that you wrote yourself, and you go over there and we'll pepper spray you. And they're going,
that's right.
Yeah, I'll take the Merc. Just take the vax. But you can always redeem. One of the men I interviewed yesterday, and I interviewed a lot, is vaccinated. And he feels not only betrayed by the government, and he feels betrayed by himself. And I've met this a lot. I even have a great Jewish friend called Gadi. Love him. He had to get vaccinated. I won't say why, but he was coerced. His parents who were in the Auschwitz. He said he was sobbing as they gave him the vaccine. He said, I've never cried. He said, I was sobbing.
Yeah.
And so he still struggles with that. But so this is where we are. It's the spiritual challenge of the time. And if we can survive through it and spiritually redefine ourselves, move, maybe even meet up spirituality and intellect to because they seem to be becoming married now, then we might reach a better world for all of us. You know, I don't know. We have to have something to fight for. I even say to people, I'll ask you this actually, because this is a question I'm asking now.
Yes.
Because I asked Nigel Farage and he couldn't answer it. He wafted for a while. I said, we're freedom fighters and we're getting disillusioned and the marches are failing. We're trying to bring ourselves back up. But from a practical point of view, if you want to climb a mountain, you see the peak and then you can climb it because you can see it. That's my destination. That's my goal. So if we're freedom fighters, what is freedom? What are we fighting for? How do we define freedom that it's a bumper sticker that people go, that's it. That's what I'm willing to die for. Because once you're willing to die for something and fight for something to the point you'll die for it, then you're alive. So what's freedom to you, Ted? From Dr. Ted.
That's a very tricky question. It's like love in some ways. You know, nobody knows how to really define love. But I think freedom can be defined as the ability to act according to your conscience, as long as you're not hurting anyone else.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the basic freedom. And that's we're not able to do. You know, we're not able to do that. And I would go further. I would say that's freedom, but I would say that this is not just about freedom. This fight, it's not just. I mean, obviously our freedoms are suppressed, and it's terrible, but the evil comes from harm. Okay, so the fight is against harm. There's a rationality that has to be pursued and made explicit. In other words, things like what John Campbell are doing and the heroes of this movement, like McCullough and Malone, and the people you see who have lost their professional standing, they've lost their jobs, but are stuck on the truth. They refuse to compromise on the truth, and the truth elusive, but we get close to it, and it's clearly, you say BS. We're clearly being served up a huge meal of BS, and somebody who says that and is prepared to stick to the truth is beyond freedom. It's because there's rational thinking involved. I'm amazed that I can't get anyone to follow the argument through with me when I speak to them. I've spoken to lots of people, and I'm a man who once had a standing in the community, as a man of medicine and science. It's amazing how people fade away as they get to the conclusion. This is true. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. Well, maybe. Okay. Well, don't you think that logic demands this? Oh, I don't know. So,
that's right. It's amazing. They value something above logic. They value something more than logic. They do.
That's what I'm finding. I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah, humans serve their needs. They have needs. They serve their needs. And at the moment, logic, even freedom, isn't their need. Even love, because over in Australia, they've cut family. They've divided families. There's some other need. The only thing I can see it is social acceptance from. That's all I can see.
That's part of it.
We're like we're an Animal Farm. We're the donkey in Animal Farm. The two donkeys.
Fear,
that's it.
Fear drove the government and public health agenda. It was able to make it work. I mean, they exaggerated the numbers of people being injured by COVID, the extent of the infectivity of COVID. All these things were exaggerated, and they're shown to be so now. I think fear could be used in the other direction as well. If the data will be revealed, that shows the extent of COVID injuries and the extent of vaccine injuries, the extent of vaccine injuries. I think there'll be then people will be afraid to get. I think people now silently are afraid to get vaccinated, but won't talk about it. I think part of you're absolutely right. The spiritual approach is really important because without a concern for humanity, unless you're concerned about your brother, about his well-being, then you're not going to do anything. But you also can't really act logically unless you have data and information. So I guess everyone's got to take their own path to correcting the problem. And just speaking to you, I've noticed, because I understand the dynamics of our talk. If so were to analyze what we're saying, I'd be talking much more as an intellect, and I don't say that as a positive thing. I'm saying I'm speaking more from an intellectual point of view, from fact-driven point of view, from that, and you're speaking more from the spiritual point of view. And I think there's room for both.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed now is because people come up to me and want to tell me facts, and I say to people, look, I've been in this battle now, like yourself, for a couple of years. I'm watching facts bounce off people's heads like a squash ball off a wall.
That's what I've just described.
Just bounces off. And Matthias Desmet actually says, you've got to reach here. And that's why I think I try now to talk more philosophically, spiritually about love, trying to circumnavigate this head that once they hear facts, they go boom, and they're like the monkeys. And but what I was going to say was, just to wrap up, because I've got to go to this gathering now at 5. Would you be interested in coming back on? I'd love to get you together with this New Zealand psychiatrist, because I think you two would hit it off. Intellectually, you're the same, and the time might be an issue, but he's just such a gorgeous man. I think you'd have a gorgeous conversation. I think he'd be very interested to link up Israel, Australia, and New Zealand, because we're in a global fight. So why don't we meet up globally?
I'm quite happy to. You just set it up.
Trying to ask you on the show, that puts you under pressure. You can't really say
no. Let me just finish my spiel by saying I really thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I've never gone public in this way in expressing my disdain and my horror at the public health policy. And that's what it is. It's horror. It's really horror. And you give me the opportunity. And I'm happy to share what I know and what I feel with other people who have a similar or even parallel views. So we can set it up, I'm sure. And
both things are really important. What you know, but what you feel now. I'll tell you this today. I've spoken to you today. You're a GP, you're a doctor, you're a well-educated man. But today, I found a man looking at my bus. I'm only a little guy. He's a little guy. And he's in his 60s, and he's looking at the bus, and he's a truck driver. He was, And then I came up to him and said, "G'day," because I'm always interested to see which way they swing. And he goes, "I saw you at Epic," and he's on our side. And I said to him, most of his family's vaccinated. I said, "Why didn't you get vaccinated?" And he said, "Just a feeling. I had something inside said, don't do it." I had to listen to it. And so here we are. Feelings
I agree with you.
And important as intellectual.
I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. It's got to be a melding of the two. We may bring different tools. Each of us, different people may bring different tools, but the product, the ultimate product, has to be one that melds a concern for humanity, a love of humanity, and a knowledge of what's actually going on in factual terms.
And trying to discern what is actually going on, because then unless something breaks, we're never going to know. It's all guesswork, really, because it's insidious.
Well, one of the fights that some people are fighting this on that level. You know, there are people like
Yeah, they
Jessica
are.
Rose. You know, there are some people who are
Mm,
looking at data, who are data driven. Now, they're
yeah.
data driven because they love humanity, not because they love data. So
Yeah, that's
it
true.
ends up at the same place. Well,
Yeah.
I'll thank you again, and I
What's
see
that?
you have to run. I have to run as well.
Oh no, I've got a bird here. I think is sit. I can hear a bird. It must be on the bus singing.
Well,
I'll tell you something about Australian birds. I know you've been here, but for people in
no, I haven't. I
Israel,
didn't make it. I didn't make it to
okay,
Australia. I told you.
for
I
people
was,
in Israel, this is just to add on a bit of likeness, and then I'll
yeah.
give you the last word then. If you're in England, the birds are kind of plain, but they sing beautifully. In Australia,
Uh-huh.
the birds are beautiful. They're white, they're red, they're colors
Yeah.
everywhere.
Interesting.
But they're like a drunk drug addict at the back of the bus going, they sing terribly. It's just a really interesting thing in Australia.
Well, think,
One of
you
the
know,
things.
something
I don't know why
that's
that's
a
funny. I
very,
find that funny.
no, I'll tell you that I think understanding evolution in terms
Yeah,
of evolutionary mechanisms, that probably fits. In other words, birds are always out to attract other birds. So you either attract it with your beautiful voice or your
that's
beautiful
right.
flower, you know,
Or how you
feathers.
look.
But you
Yeah.
don't need both. You don't need
You
both.
don't need both.
One or the
Yeah, you
other.
don't need both. Yeah,
All right.
that's right.
Good.
Take one. Thank you for coming on. Is there anything, just to finish, I'm going to give you one last challenge. This is a profound thing that happened, and this last few years have been profound moments. This young woman came to a march once, covered in tattoos and body piercings and skinny and pale.
Yeah.
And she told me, I live in my room playing computer games. I never leave it. I'm a hermit and I
Yeah.
want to be a philosopher. And I've been watching you and I'm watching these people here. And I've come because I think what's happening is wrong. And because I'm an introvert, you need to listen to me if I'm speaking. She was amazing. And she
Yeah.
said, I give you this challenge. You have a moral obligation not to sell hopelessness, no matter how tight its grip. Go. End the show. Give us some hope.
Yeah. I really do believe that's a very profound statement. And I think if
It
you look at
is.
history, I think if you look at history, it teaches us that tyranny never survives. There's something about human beings that you said, you know, maybe we're the outliers and maybe we're the seeds of some, you know, the people who fought against communism behind the Iron Curtain were small in number and terribly persecuted. But in the end, the Iron Curtain fell, and every tyranny eventually falls, even the most proud tyranny. And the Nazis fell fast, relatively.
Mm.
So that the hope is that if we keep the light alive, it'll spread and that people will pick it up. I actually believe the thing will implode on its own. I think that you can only harm people so badly before they fight back, and I think the thing will implode. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that during the transition period, you need the individuals who are prepared to maintain their dignity and the truth and their love of humanity and persist in keeping alive the hope that will come to a better place. And that's what brings us together. I was very touched actually by and that's why I volunteered to come on when you said we're all Jews, because that is an identification with a kind of persecution which is irrational and
Mm.
so ingrained in some societies. And here you have it. We're all in the same situation now. So I'm with
Mm.
you. You know, there's no barriers
I
between
even
us.
think we have to.
We're on the same side
Yeah,
of
we
this
are.
argument, and it brings you together. And when you said about spirituality, I really do sense that there's a certainly among people who have been awakened to the degree of the evil.
Mm.
There's a spirituality that is arising, which is very interesting.
Yeah,
So till next
amazing.
time.
Till next time. Thank you so much, Doctor. I'm going to end the recording there. Amen to everything you
That's
just
fine.
said. God bless.
Well, good. Thank you.
Come mothers, fathers throughout the land. Don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. And your old road is rapidly fading. So get on the new one. If you can't lend a hand, the times they are a change.